there used to be commercials, and I remember they passed a law. I was a kid in the 70s. You would see the toys doing things in the commercial that they really couldn't do, right? Like the helicopter would be flying and this sort of thing. And I remember getting one like that, and the helicopter really couldn't fly. And I was devastated, right? I was like so mad, right? It was like, and I forget my imagination. It's better to do what the TV said it was going to do.
Right.
3, 2, 1, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in the DeLorean. Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly? The podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
Hello, my dear Tamara.
Hakeem, how are you? Where are you?
Yes, I am not in my normal location. I am spending some time on the road, and this is where you find me. I'm in Las Vegas. It's hot, as always.
It's always hot in Las Vegas.
Yes, it is. It is. So I'm here doing another little gig, but let me tell you, there's something I couldn't wait to tell you about.
What?
Have you ever had something on your bucket list that you're like, oh, I want to do that so bad?
Sure,
And
that's
then
what
you
bucket
do
list
it.
is.
But then you do it and you're like, yikes. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have.
Oh no, did you have a bucket list fail?
Hard.
What happened?
Are you familiar with the 0G airplane?
The vomit comet?
I know why it's named that now.
Okay, tell me more. I need to know more because I have always wanted to go on the vomit comet.
So it's mostly, a lot of experiments, a lot of zero gravity NASA experiments. So I got to go on it, and I made it through 1/3. You do several of these parabolic paths to hit weightlessness. I made it through 1/3 of them, and then all faucets open, and it was misery from that point forward.
Okay, wait, go back for a sec. So this is something you and I, because we are nerdy this way, know about.
Yeah.
But for those who might not actually be familiar with what we're talking about,
Yes.
What is the 0G plane? Are you flying in space? Are you flying in low atmosphere? Give folks an insight.
Yeah. So this plane was originally for astronaut training for weightlessness. And what happens is you get extra gravity and less gravity. So what happens is it goes up at like a 45-degree angle, accelerating. So you really feel like double gravity, and I was doing little experiments of like trying to just lift my arm and feeling that, you could, so easy to feel, and it's weird. And then when it gets to the top, you feel that weight go away. And then it rolls over and goes into a dive, which puts you in free fall. And that's what happens. You feel your weight go away. And that is the moment of queasiness.
And how many of what percentage of the folks on this experimental flight had the same reaction as you? Like, are you alone?
There were two others.
Okay.
There were two others. Yeah. There were two others. So I went first.
Well, you're a trendsetter, so clearly.
I got it going, yeah. But they're like, every flight, it happens, and sometimes it's everybody, right? So
wow.
The flight I went on wasn't like that. So but it was like, okay, check that off the bucket list. No need to go there again. All right, so let's get to this today. We're speaking of planes, we were not inside of a Decepticon.
No, and that should give you a clue as to what we are talking about today, because I don't know, it kind of sounds like your experience transformed your bucket list ideas.
Yes, and it also transformed some puke buckets.
Yeah. All right, clearly today we are talking about Transformers.
Transformers. Who doesn't love Transformers? Yes.
The Transformers, more than meets the eye.
We're going to talk about Transformers. We're going to talk about the science and engineering of can robots transform into other vehicles and vice versa. Obviously, this is massive franchise. I mean, it started off as a toy from Hasbro and a Japanese company. Then it became an animated series, then an animated film, then live action films. There's comics, there's there's all kinds of stuff. But just to kind of like keep the conversation slightly manageable, we're mostly going to focus on the beginnings of it. We're gonna take a look, really pull from the beginnings of the first animated series, which most folks refer to as G1, the first animated movie, which was 2000. No, sorry, that's the live one. The animated series is 1984. The animated movie is 1986. And the live action movies with Michael Bay started in 2007. So we're going to talk about like the first one.
Man, I am always a late adapter. I'm frequently a late adapter to a lot of stuff, right? So I found the Transformers relatively late. I didn't watch them. I hear people talking about things, and finally I get around to watching it. And once I did watch it, I love the whole concept, right? Of the alien planet, the fact of, one thing about it though, is that I feel like we always, and when I say we, I mean humans in general, you have this opportunity for this whole new planet, but then it becomes very humanized, And so a lot of like our theological origin stories that we have as humans end up being similar to the origin stories that we have in our sci-fi, right?
Sure.
Like there's, yeah. I'd like to see us break away from that, come up with something completely new and original for like how you came into being. But
the interesting thing about Transformers is that depending on which piece of the franchise you start watching or reading or playing, there are a lot of different origin stories. Like
that's true.
The pieces that we just mentioned, the animated stuff and the live action series, they have different origin stories about how they got their powers. Like the Allspark is, and I will also pause to say, we are clearly talking about things that have been around for a while, but if you do not want us to spoil anything about Transformers, if this is new to you, hit pause, go watch all the stuff, and then come back and talk to us. So, all right, that's a spoiler warning.
Hop in your DeLorean. Hop in your DeLorean, go back to the early 90s.
Exactly. Right. So I was saying, so like the Allspark, which you were just talking about, that's the source of power in the live action movie, or the first set of them. Yeah. In the animated series, it's a whole different set. It's the Quintessons who created them.
Ooh.
And their abilities to transform came about from the Autobots. Well, okay. So let's like quick primer.
Oh yeah. Who invented? Right. Yeah, who invented transforming? Autobots, Decepticons, different origins. Yeah.
Different origins. So like quick primer for those who, like me, are actually newer to this franchise. So you've got two basic sentient robot groups. You've got the Autobots, who are a peace-loving group, and you've got the Decepticons, who want to take over the universe. The Autobots are generally...
who feel it's their destiny.
Right, exactly. The Autobots are led by Optimus Prime, usually referred to as Prime. The Decepticons are led by Megatron. There are other groups who come in later on, but that's kind of like the basics. So in the animated series, there's a race of aliens called the Quintessons who actually were initially behind it. And there is no Allspark. And then there's later versions of the cartoons that actually flip it, where first it was the Autobots who kind of invented transforming, and then later it was the Decepticons. So you can kind of enter this in any other place. There's no like one definitive version.
There's no one origin of the transformation process.
No.
Well, what I love about this, so when we get these shows to analyze, some of them are like, oh my God, I love that. It's so nostalgic. And there's a little bit of that here. And some of them are like, oh my God, I've never seen this before.
Right.
I'm so happy to discover it. And then some of them are like, oh, I know this, but I didn't know that about this. And that's what this particular research led me to. Like, I didn't know the origin stories that we just went over, right? I learned those in studying this. And I also didn't know, because I used to think, why are the Autobots so lame in terms of their vehicle form? in comparison to the Decepticons, right?
Right.
And then I learned in studying for this, like, oh, the Decepticons were all for military purposes, whereas the Autobots were for commercial labor, civilian purposes. So, yeah. So, anyway, about transformation. Here's the question.
What's your question?
Do we already do this? And the answer is yes. There are self-assembling, reconfigurable robots that exist in various forms already. And there are people that have attempted to make Transformer-like designs that are based on the Transformers, right? And basically what they prioritize determines the form they come up with. Do they want it to be functional? Do they want it to look like a really good robot? Do they want it to look like a really good vehicle, right? But here's the big problem. The ones that come close to functioning anything like a Transformer, they're super freaking heavy. Even the Transformers in the cartoon, when they walk, they're super heavy, okay? And that to me is not, can you transform, can you be modularized, and how far can that technology be pushed? So let me tell you what I mean by that. These modular robots could be a bunch of triangles that self-assemble into different shapes, and then they can have a function like walking or rotating, right? They turn into wheels.
I have a question. When you say they self-assemble into different shapes, I actually have two questions. And I think something that's really interesting about this conversation in general is, usually we're breaking things down. You are breaking things down. I'm asking you questions about things, the science of things. This is really more of an engineering conversation.
That's right. Yeah. So, as you may not know, my very first job title out of graduate school was senior process engineer. So a lot of people, people think of me as an astrophysicist, but I'm trained in physics. And the things that what we do is, you envision some experiment or observation that you want to make, but typically the technology to do that doesn't exist. So you have to invent it and build it yourself, right? So that's why I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an astrophysicist and I have 7 American patents, right? So, that's not two things that typically go together because you think of observing and analyzing data. So I love engineering. And when I became an engineer, it totally changed my perspective on the world because everything around you is engineered, right? And understanding the engineering process of iterating to an optimized form, is beautiful.
So you started to say, you could have triangles that could self-assemble.
Right.
How do they know how to self-assemble? Are we getting into questions of intelligence here? And then my second question was, I'm just curious about, I guess what I'm curious about are sort of the different modes of assembly, right? Like heat, electromagnetism, things like that. So you can answer any and all or none of those.
Yeah. I'll answer all, or at least I'll try as far as my memory can take me. I think right now the ones I've seen have mostly been from robotics labs, right? These are not walking through the street, right? And so it is my understanding that they have predetermined shapes that they take on, that they program those into it. And now the question is, what you're getting at is, can you somehow have a centralized, you don't want to centralize. That's the whole thing. You don't want a centralized brain. You want it distributed throughout all the parts, right? Kind of how every tentacle of an octopus has its own neurons. So I think that there probably are some predetermined sets of possible shapes they can take on. I don't know that to be the case. I'm guessing that. And then the second question was what?
The second question was, I was just curious about with these, sort of prototypes and experiments that they've been doing to create these transformational robots into other objects. What are the different modes that they do? The literal engineering of is it heat? Are they moving via magnets? What are some of the ways that they're doing that?
Yeah. So what they're doing, the ones I've looked at, I can't say fully. So the really big ones are on wheels. it needs to be on a wheel. And then there are ones that are little cube, not perfect cubes, but little cube-like ones. And so when they come together, somehow they have a a function that they move relative to each other,
Mhm.
but I'm not exactly sure how they do it because I think their attachment points are magnetic.
Okay.
And so how does it make itself? That's interesting. I haven't. I got to look at it. But the one that's made of triangles, it has
Mhm.
little mechanical and electronic components that are visible on the surface.
Okay.
So you can, little actuators and such, right, to move
Mhm.
it. So that one was obvious. For the ones that are like cubes, everything is hidden on the inside, right? So even when it's by itself, it can like roll over, and so they can roll into each other, connect,
Yeah.
and then make different forms. So somehow, I don't know how when they come together in one form, how they do coordinated movement, but they do it. That's the whole damn point. They're doing it, right? they're,
If we do have any engineers or just folks who are interested
yeah,
in this who are watching or listening, definitely if
yeah.
you have more intel about this, let us know in the comments because we want to know more.
Yeah, when I became a TED fellow back a dozen years ago, this guy Saeed, it was his research to make these they're trying to do it with houses, self-assembling everything, right? Self-assembling chairs. But here's the thing I was getting at with the weight element of it, right? In the movie, in the comics, in the cartoon, right? And toy, right? They're durable and nimble and strong. Nothing that has been built so far even comes close to that. It's big, durable, and heavy, but there's no nimble. There's no nimble to it, right?
Transformer be nimble, transformer be quick. Transformer, we have not made that yet, which can stick.
No, it is not sticking. It ain't sufficiently slick and it don't stick. So, the other thing about where I was going is with this modular approach, self-assembly modular is, you can make these modules as small as you want theoretically, right? Until you get to the minimal size of your robotic form. So a general philosophy in the field of self-assembling reconfigurable robots is that every individual unit is identical, right?
Okay.
And so if you look at something like a transformer, if they're a jet, they need to have a jet engine somewhere. And there's a difference between a motor and an engine, right? An electric motor and a fuel-eating engine. And so those components, integrating that into this sort of modular philosophy of all components being equal, that is a difficulty, right? So it seems like you'd have to build around whatever your power source is. Okay, so whatever engine. So how can you both drive a car and walk as a robot with the same engine, right? If it's a normal combustion engine, that might be easier than the jet, like the Decepticons are doing, right? You're going to be a jet and you're going to walk around like a robot, like, you're very heavy. But getting back to where I was going, if you imagine the limits if you have very tiny modular elements, you're basically now talking about like a liquid of robots, of tiny robots that can reconfigure themselves. But it seems like you need some specialists, right? You need some generalists and you need some specialists. But even then, can I imagine making a transformer? And I get back to that same place. How can you get that level of durability and nimbleness at that weight? I just don't see it happening.
So it's basically what you're saying, that if you could potentially get to basically whatever your first version is, and then your second version is like, if your first version is the robot and your second version is, functional item like a car, that those would have to be of equal, let's say, I guess you would say equal mass.
In the real world, yeah. In the real universe,
in the real
they would
world.
have to be an equal mass. Unless you could throw a part off to sit to the side. But at the same time, if imagine you take away the nimbleness thing, and all I have is something that is self-assembling, and I can just make it take on all sorts of different shapes.
Right.
Yeah, they're doing that already, right? But now if you wanted to have those vehicle actions that require a motor, and you wanted to be jumping around and running and all of this kind of stuff, and doing karate kicks, yeah, now you're deep in the realm of not I don't see it happening today, and I don't know what technologies we're going to come up with tomorrow. Like, you can make a transformer-like thing that looks like a transformer that all it does is, I'm going to stand here like a dude and kick, right? And even that wouldn't be super nimble.
No, we're not there yet with robotics.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting too, though, because like listening to you talk about, almost getting things down to like a liquid state, to this very, I almost want to say like primal elemental state that you could then form it into whatever you needed to form it into, whether it's, a jet engine or a foot or,
Right.
a heart or whatever it is that's, locomoting.
A heart.
A heart. Tin Man, Wizard of Oz. But no, seriously, like if you could get it down to, I mean, my brain starts to go kick into biology and thinking about DNA and cells and, this idea that on this very basic level, ostensibly all the particles are the same. And then there are biological processes in our body that actually differentiate cells and turn them into the specialists that you are talking about.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, that's the wet stuff. I don't know if that works in robotics at all or ever could.
A robotic stem cell, right? I mean, that's your basic unit. I mean, that can be modified into whatever. I mean, that's what nature gives us. Like, I was talking to a biologist friend, neuroscientist, and I said something about, like, I don't know how everything is just, these three particles: electron, proton, neutron, matter. And they're like, and your DNA, as complex as it is, it's 5 elements, just in a very special configuration, So could you have these simple things in very special configurations that, because but how they adhere to each other such that, they can take a punch and not just liquefy,
All right. So what's your, I guess,
their energy absorption? I'm saying that Transformers, as they are pictured in these movies doing what they do, they don't fly.
I can't say I'm surprised. Do you think they ever could fly?
You could have modularity and transformation. There's already small transforming vehicles that change their shape in order to travel in different ways, right? You can go from, you can be amphibious, you can go from ground to air, that sort of thing. But going from a walking, humanoid form is the tough one, right? But even maybe like a tetrapod, right? If you want to go from a dog form to a flying form, like, how would you do that? The ones with the wheels, and then the wheels themselves are drone propeller units. That works well.
It's fine. Like when you were talking about like going from the dog form to, like, it made me think of, there's a little bit of reading I've done about, and prepping for this, about some of the stuff that the military is doing. And again, we don't know how much they tell us and don't tell us, but like, when they're like for search and rescue stuff, and the ability to send something in, if you're sending it into like a cave or earthquake recovery or things like that, or minefield stuff, so that it can go and then it can adapt in the place. But as you said, like, even with that, the nimbility, what's the word?
Quality of nimbility.
Nimbility is not there yet. Okay, so story. Do Transformers fly when it comes to
right?
story?
Like, how do you do that? Because there's like so many Transformer stories.
Yeah. And so, like, I'm trying to go back to basics here. Because again, like this, I didn't play with Transformers when I was a kid. I have no, you laid out like some examples before about like, sometimes it's nostalgic, sometimes it's totally new, sometimes you see it differently. I don't have any nostalgic attachment.
It's all new for you.
Yeah, it's all new for me. And so, I go back to, all right, well, let's look at, because again, like, we don't do big general reviews of movies and series in this. It's really, we're looking at a device or a technology and saying, how does that drive the story? And sometimes we look at things that are kind of ancillary to the story, like they're a feature, but they're not the concept. So, but when it comes to Transformers, like, it's the whole thing.
Without the transformation part, the title of it would just be the.
I know, right?
Do you love the?
Do you love that? What'd you think of that? Um, so, and actually for the movies, it would be nothing because movies are just Transformers. Not even
Oh,
the Transformers. It's
nameless.
just
Yeah.
Transformers.
Yeah.
Um, so that like so when I think about it from that perspective, then it's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, how well do they bring this concept to life? Because it is so intrinsic to it. And it's interesting, we talked about how the animated version and the live versions all have different origin stories. When I was watching the animated stuff, they transform cartoons, and I'm talking now about like 2D, two-dimensional animation. And you can do things in animation that would be really hard to do in real life, right? So you can kind of make whatever you want. My problem was with the mass thing we were talking about before,
Right.
where sometimes you have a
A little
big
or big.
transformer turning into like, a cassette deck or something like that.
Right.
And that threw me.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you think about play with it as a toy, like, yeah, you can fold it up, but it's still
Right.
got all the stuff.
Right. It's
Um,
still, yeah.
so that bumped me. And then when you talk about what's happening in the live action movies, obviously everything's CGI, and we'll get into that as well.
Ooh, but look, can we get into it now? Because I've been couldn't wait to get to that tomorrow. Okay, you go.
Sure. No. Go. What?
Man, let me tell you. Again, when I don't know how to trust myself always because so much of the experience, I
Mhm.
think, is based on one's expectation of the experience.
Sure.
And I did not expect the CGI of the Transformers to be so realistic, right? I was anticipating, oh, this is going to be right, and they blew me away. I was like, whoa, dude, this is so realistic. Yeah,
Yeah, I gotta give huge props to the CGI folks, and Industrial Light and Magic. So this movie represented a huge breakthrough in CGI, and they actually had to come up with a whole bunch of new
mm,
processes. So it's interesting if you watch the movie and you see the cars, they are all super reflective and shiny and bright. And
mm,
then if you look at the robot versions of the Transformers, so like the vehicles are, the alternate forms. You look at the
yeah,
robot versions, they're kind of grimy and messy.
mm,
And part of that has to do, the reasoning for that is because of the expense and the processing time of creating those reflective surfaces. Michael Bay
ooh,
has talked in interviews about how he just wanted it to look super freaking cool, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
that is why those vehicles look so amazing. And they even kind of work it into a plot point with Bumblebee, the yellow car, where, at first Bumblebee is kind of this grimy Camaro, and then he gets insulted and he transforms into like the slick Camaro. By the way, I did wear my honeycomb necklace in tribute to Bumblebee.
All right.
Um, so,
Not the
so
James Webb Space Telescope.
no, but I have one of those.
Oh,
It just
nice,
didn't seem
nice.
appropriate for this one. Um,
Yeah.
yes, I'm geeky that way. Sometimes I try to match accessories. So anywho, so
Yeah.
when you're talking about doing the animation, as I was saying, creating those reflective surfaces,
Oh, yeah.
incredibly time intensive, takes a lot of processing power. So instead, what they did was they used a different process for the robots. And instead they did a lot of work with layering, and they put layers of grime on them, layers of dirt, etc. So that's what they thought was going to help, but it ended up being almost as labor intensive in a different way, because every time they would change a camera angle or move in or out, um, they would have to have the CGI artists go and redo that so that it would look right for that angle. So they almost like switched processing time for human labor when it came to doing that. So that was one thing. The other thing is that, you talked about the heaviness before versus like the
Yeah.
nimbleness. That came
Yeah.
into play as well.
Mm.
Because, usually when we see, as you were saying, when we have things that are like big and heavy, they're
Yeah.
slow.
Right.
Michael Bay
Exactly.
didn't want any slow fight scenes, and if you
Yeah.
watch, I mean, these things are moving. So, the way that they were able to do that was by having close-ups, because then you
Ah,
could actually kind of fake that. It was almost like a cheat.
yeah.
However, with
Like
a close-up,
parallax.
what's parallax?
Parallax is the fact that the farther something is away from you, the slower it appears to move. So the way that you illustrate it's the way you measure distances to planets and stars,
Mhm.
right? Because if I like close one eye and then the other, and I hold my thumb up, it
Uh-huh.
appears to move left, right relative to the background.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. If you
Yeah.
hold your thumb still and
Still.
open
Okay.
one eye and then the other. Close.
Oh, yeah, it's moving.
Yeah. Now, if you put it farther away, it moves left, right again, but not as much.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So knowing the distance between your eyes and how much your thumb moves, you can calculate the length of your arm, right? But it's the same way. Something moving very near you appears to be moving faster than
Mhm.
something moving farther away. Like an airplane in the sky looks like it's going hella slow. Whereas a car going close to you at 20 miles
Mhm.
per hour almost gives you a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly. So that was exactly what
Yeah.
they did with
Yeah.
animating these battle scenes. So
Yeah.
that was the cheat to get that fast
That's
motion that
smart.
we want, and so that it would make sense to us as audience members watching these big, bulky creatures fight quickly.
Yeah.
However, the closer you get, the more detailed the animation needs to be, the more work that takes. And then you add on the idea that he wanted these characters to have some emotion, right? And to not just be, big robots, blah, blah, blah. And look,
Metal face.
there's not that many of them that we get to know. There's Megatron, there's Optimus Prime, and there's Bumblebee, and those are the main ones, at least in the first
Right.
movie.
Yeah.
So what they did technique wise was with their faces, they composed them of a whole bunch of different plates, because usually when you're having somebody who's emoting, like we're soft, our soft faces help us to emote. And when you're doing that in CGI, that's always a challenge, right? To make that
Yeah.
movement look realistic. So
Yeah.
with the robots, in order to give them that sense of motion and, being able to express something, their faces are composed of all of these different plates,
Uh,
which is really a lot of work to animate, because the more plates you have, the
yeah.
more moving pieces, you have to
Right.
change it shot for shot for shot. So one of
Wow.
the sort of criticisms of the initial movie was that the Transformers didn't have like a lot of close-up time, right? Like you have a lot of humans in the movie, but if it's Transformers, you want more Transformers. And that's because they could do so few of these big close-up shots because they were so expensive. Yeah. Um, that said, what they did do is amazing, and I think that, they did a fantastic job with bringing these Transformers to life. So for me, when I think about, like, do the Transformers fly from a story perspective? I would say for the animated movies, for me, that's less successful, and that's no, like, dint on animation. I mean, if you go further down into the franchise, like, they've actually won awards and things like that, so I
Yeah.
don't wanna diss on the animators. I'm just saying, like, for me as somebody responding to it, it's not my cup of tea, it didn't draw me in, it's just not
Yeah.
my thing. But I think the success of how they were able to bring them to life in the live action movies is a huge,
Right.
huge credit to the
Right.
entire
Yeah.
effects team. And I will also say too, those explosions you see, practical.
Mm.
Michael Bay likes to blow
Mm.
shit up.
Like
So
actual real explosions.
yeah, so that was
Yeah.
a third like element in bringing things
Yeah.
to life that was both helpful and made things more complicated, because he would blow stuff up on set. You see the actors like running and reacting. They're really running and reacting. Shia LaBeouf is like, ah!
Get me the heck out of here.
Right.
Ah! Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the good thing was there was smoke that you could use to kind of help camouflage some of the robot stuff to, again, make them, you had like a smoke screen. Also, though, smoke is notoriously difficult to work with in post-production. So, double sword. But at the end of the day, my definitive answer for does it work story-wise is not so much for me in animation, but a definite yes in bringing them to life in live action.
I concur 100%. Yeah, the animation is all over the place, but the live action, they pretty
Mhm.
much stuck well, I'm not going to say stuck with, but throughout the movies, the first movies is certainly consistent and well executed on the CGI, visual effects, practical effects, DOS effects. It's all okay. So back to Transformers for the vibe.
So I got a question for you. So one of the other interesting things for me in thinking about this movie is it was a shift. It kind of was at the beginning of the shift in where you have movies made based on toys as opposed to toys that came from movies. So before before the mid 70s, it was pretty much that like a movie or a TV show would come out and then they might produce a toy to help with the marketing. This was in the first wave of movies where the toy came first and then they built narrative stuff around it. So like one of the very first ones, believe it or not, was a Raggedy Ann and Andy film musical. So and that was in 1977. Okay, so with Transformers, though, this was really like your kind of foray into these kinds of things. So you had like Transformers, Masters of the Universe. You had, like, believe it or not, like your My Little Pony. And then you eventually like get into things like Rainbow Bright and Care Bears and things like that, and Bratz dolls and GI Joe, and obviously you have like the Barbie movie, and so. But this was the beginning of that. And so one of the things that I was thinking about, which like for me, I'd love to pose as our like, does it fly for the vibes question, is do you think it is a good thing for kids to have movies that are based on toys, or does it kind of limit and curtail their imagination? Because it's telling them what the story should be, as opposed to giving them a toy and letting them use their imagination to create a world.
Well, let me tell you, there used to be commercials, and I remember they passed a law. I was a kid in the 70s, and you would see the toys doing things in the commercial that they really couldn't do, right? Like the helicopter would be flying and this sort of thing. And I remember getting one like that, and the helicopter really couldn't fly, and I was devastated, right? I was just like so mad, right? It was like, and I forget my imagination. It's better to do what the TV said it was going to do.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm sure eventually, I remember that moment of disappointment, but I don't remember what came after. I'm sure I rapidly adapted and then used my imagination. But, here's where I am with changing times. I have to ask myself certain questions, because I think as a human being, I have certain instincts, but we're so unnatural now. And I don't mean that in a bad way. What I mean is, we've domesticated ourselves. We have a society. Our, firmware is based on what happened in our ancestral environment, right? And so human society and technology is changing much more rapidly than we are evolving. And so I think that our inclinations and our, inclinations are not necessarily programmed for today. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One example was I read some quote. At the time I read the quote, we were going through this time period where nobody was writing cursive anymore, and people were like, oh, I begrudge the existence of the computer, right? And they were talking about, this particular thing showed some writing from someone who, what was it that came out? Paper. And they were like, people aren't going to memorize anything anymore, right? Now we're able to hold everything in our heads. Once you have paper, nobody's going to remember anything anymore. Kind of like what GPS has now done to us.
Right.
But is it a problem? Right? I'm sure there was a time if you didn't know how to chip your own stone arrowheads and spear tips, you weren't going to survive. Today, you don't need to know that, and you survive, right? So what I'm saying is changing times and technologies, we have a built-in, I think, resistance to them quite often. And in the end, things work out okay. Because if you think about it, we sort of like catastrophize, but what our ancestors have gone through over the last 25 million years since proconsul was in a tree, I think we'll be okay. with toys. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I look at it as though, like, yeah, we'll be okay, but I still, and look, obviously, I love technology and toys and gizmos and gadgets. On one hand, yes, we need to change with the times and use the tools that are presented to us and know how to use them so we can make choices about them. However, I also think it's important to, um, I think it's important to be able to exercise imagination and not spoon feed answers. So, while I don't think that, like, you know, movies based on toys are a bad thing, there's good ones, there's bad ones and all of that. I do think it's important to give kids the opportunity to have a stimulus of a toy and let their imagination take it someplace first before you then give them an additional property that's gonna tell them what the story is. And, like, I'm thinking specifically of, like, so Legos, my daughter was really into Legos for a while when she was younger, and I'm not gonna remember the name of the particular, like, Legos, not franchise, but, like, sub whatever it is. But there's a whole group of them that have female characters, and they've got, like, all these different things that you can make, from, like, a camper to a house to a pool to an observatory. Um, yeah, and so, like, she never had an interest in building, like, ships and planes and cars and things like that, but she would take these Legos, she would build all kinds of things. Sometimes, when you get Legos, you have really detailed instructions. Sometimes she'd build them according to that, but then she'd break them and she'd make totally new things out of her own imagination. And then once she had built something, she would take these characters and she wasn't building anymore. She was making up story scenarios.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So, look, I think some of the Lego movies are fantastic. They're fun, they're
Yeah.
imaginative, but I'm really glad that she had the experience
Right.
of stimulating her own imagination, coming up with her own Lego
Yeah, but let me
world
ask you a
building.
question.
Yeah.
Here's a question. You're a writer. Her dad's a creative. Is it just like something she has in her innately? Like it's in your genes? Does it go up to her grandparents? Like, is that a thing?
I mean, maybe her grandma's a storyteller too. So,
See?
yeah. But I think any kid can do that. I think any kid
True.
can do that. And I think that,
Listen.
well, not everyone is, going to become look, I'll say two things.
Right.
Not everyone is going to become
Yeah.
a professional storyteller. Imagination is useful in whatever you do. So giving kids a chance to creatively build on something is important before you tell them what something is. Because I feel like, especially, like, going back to our conversation about CGI, because things now in movies can look so realistic,
Yeah.
once you present that, it can be hard to think outside of anything else.
This is true. Yeah, this is true. Once you give that, you can find the mind in a way. Yeah.
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 But that's also, I guess,
Is it inspiration or is it what's confinement?
Confinement, yeah. But I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's true about science too. Like, not everybody needs to be a scientist, but in this
Oh,
day and
absolutely
age,
not. No.
like, people need a general understanding and appreciation
Right.
for all of STEM because that's the world that we live in. So to make your way through that world, just kind of understanding some basic stuff helps make the decisions about what you do every day.
Another element of the vibe. The question is, would I want Cybertronians to exist in my universe? Quick answer, no. All right.
Yeah.
Beings made of metal that are way bigger and stronger than me? No. You're not eating me.
I wouldn't want
Metal.
Cybertonians to exist, but I do like the idea of things that can transform into something else. I like the general idea of transforming things.
Let me
if I
think
had a
about that.
if I had a car that could then transform into a bike, that'd be pretty cool.
Maybe.
Like, I drive in my car to the beach because it's got my stuff. I dump my stuff, and then I want to go for, like, a bike ride along the shore. I'd, like, press the button and it transforms. Like, that'd be cool.
Well, I have this New Orleans Saints bottle opener that's also a fingernail clipper, but that's about as far as I want to go with that. Those things look dangerous. All right, so let's give our final thumbs up, thumbs down. Does it fly? Does it not? For the vibes.
When it comes to toys and movies, I'm down with movies based on toys, as long as you provide some room for imagination first, and then follow up with the narrative. And then as far as Transformers in the real world, no, thank you. No, thank you.
Well, there's the other one. Given all of that, is it such a cool movie that I'm just so happy it was made? Yes. I love that the Transformers movie exists. I love that the Transformer cartoons exist. Real Transformers, I don't want you to exist. But you fly for the vibes for me in your entertainment form, not your deadly, I'm going to eat you Hakeem form.
For me, it flies for the vibes, like the movie, in terms of like what it has done for movie technology. As far as do
Ooh.
I enjoy these movies? No, it does not fly for me. No, not my thing.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
appreciate it as someone in the industry, and I'm so
Right.
appreciative of like all of the VFX people. So huge props to them. But yeah, no, not for me.
I'm watching this next one though.
We will have another conversation after that.
Or am I?
We'll see. Perhaps it will transform my opinion. Well, as always, it is a pleasure talking to you about this stuff.
As well.
Enjoy the rest of your time in Vegas.
you.
Don't get into too much trouble.
I'm just going to be in my room, like, reading Shakespeare or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like boring,
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Organic chemistry.
All right. Have fun with your textbooks. And until next time, my friend.
All right, take care.
And also, just real quick, if folks do want to know more about some of the stuff that we've talked in this episode, or if you want to check out other episodes of Does It Fly, you can find us on all socials on Does It Fly Pod, or on the website, doesitflypod.com. Our producers do an incredible job of pointing you to resources that we've talked about here, some of the different technologies. You can see probably see some of the examples of that Hakeem gave of, different current technologies that exist. So definitely check it out and like and subscribe and all that fun stuff. Thanks for watching.